And so I now turn to Maria Subtelny, Professor of Persian and Islamic Studies at the University of Toronto, the author of numerous books and articles concerning late antique and medieval Persian history and literature. So both of them. A key work has been Timurids in Transition, Turco-Persian Politics and Acculturation in Medieval Iran, which has won the 2008 Hoshang Purch Shariati Iranian Studies Book Award. And she is going to address us on Baysunghur Mirza's Secretum Secretorum, a pseudo-Aristotelian mirror of princes from a Timurid Atelier. Maria.
Thank you very much. I am going to try to share my screen here now. Okay, so you see, and the title of my talk, I'm going to be speaking about this, this particular manuscript, which has been entitled Nasaih Iskandar. Now, Nasaih Iskandar is a copy of a notorious pseudo-Aristotelian text, usually known by the title Sirr al-asrar, that is the secret of secrets. Copied most probably in Herat by the famed calligrapher of Baysunghur Mirza's Atelier, Ja'far al-Baysunghuri, in 829 or 1425-26, when Baysunghur was 28 years old. It appears to be the sole Timurid era copy of the original Arabic of this work. Thanks to the title given to the manuscript in the hand list of Arabic manuscripts in the Chester Beatty Library, it was not recognized as such until it was identified in 1966 by the Arabists and historians of Islamic philosophy, Helmut Getje and Hans Deiber. In fact, the work has, and here I'm this is just the picture of the image of the colophon itself. In fact, the work has no title. Just gotta go back here. Yeah, the work has no title. The Kufic inscription in the Unvan simply reads, "On the unicity of the Creator, may his name be exalted. Fi tawhid al-bari azza ismuhu." The title Nasaih Iskandar must have been given to it by Arthur J. Arbery, who compiled the hand list as counsel supposed to have been given to Alexander the Great. This is because the Sirr al-asrar purports to be the correspondence Aristotle conducted with his most famous pupil, Alexander the Great, while the latter was engaged in the conquest of Iran, although this is not mentioned in the Baysunghur manuscript, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Hence the apostrophe, Ya Sikandar, O Alexander, that recurs throughout the text. So here you can see, can you see my cursor? Yes, okay. Ya Sikandar, all the way through, highlighted in gold thuluth letters. The Sirr al-asrar, I say, is a notorious, and it is a notorious text for several reasons. It purports to be a work by Aristotle, supposedly his Politics, that had been translated into Arabic from the Greek. It is not. It is a pseudo-Aristotelian work, nor was it ever translated from Greek or from Greek into Rumi, and then into Arabic, as stated in some versions of the work. This does not in any way detract from its importance or its extraordinary impact, because it was widely believed, both in the Islamic world as well as in Europe, where it actually had a real career, to be an original work by Aristotle. Pseudo-Aristotelian works abounded in the global Middle Ages. There were about 100 such works, and in many cases, they were more influential than the genuine works of Aristotle. The Sirr al-asrar was translated into Latin twice, once in the 12th century and again in the 13th century as Secretum Secretorum, so the direct translation of Sirr al-asrar, okay, secret of secrets. From the Latin, it was translated into virtually every European vernacular, including French, Spanish, Italian, German, is actually a very recent PhD on the German translation, Czech, and English. There were 9 English translations that were made. And here you have one, a nice, very nice example. And this is a manuscript from the 15th century. An edition of the Russian, or more accurately, Ruthenian translation, actually done from a Hebrew translation of the Arabic, was just recently published by the Warburg Institute. The last printed edition of the Latin dates from 1555. There are around 600 Latin manuscripts of the Secretum Secretorum, compared with less than 100 Arabic manuscripts of the Sirr al-asrar. Many of the manuscripts of the Secretum Secretorum were to be found in the libraries of reigning European monarchs, princes, and high ecclesiastical authorities. I would venture to guess that there is not a single major library in the world that does not possess a copy of a manuscript or printed edition of either the Latin or one of the vernacular translations. Even the University of Toronto Rare Book Library has a copy of one of the French translations. As for when and where it was composed, this too is a mystery. The current scholarly consensus is that the Sirr al-asrar was an anonymous compilation made in Arabic from a variety of sources: Greek, Byzantine, Syriac, Indian, and Iranian, and probably completed in the 10th century. It bears some resemblance to the style and content of the writings of the Neoplatonizing encyclopedist known as the Akhwan as-Safa. For my part, I believe it betrays a late antique Iranian, that is to say, Sasanian background. I've been working on an article on the topic. In the Islamic world, it was cited by many reputable authors. Ibn Juljul of Cordoba, the Andalusian physician and pharmacologist, was probably the earliest author to cite it by name and to include excerpts from it in his Tabaqat al-Atibba wal-Hukama, the generations of physicians and sages, which he composed in 377, that is 987 AD. Tellingly, he averred that no one had ever composed such a book before Aristotle. Despite expressing some mild skepticism about its authorship, Ibn Khaldun, who died in 1406, cited passages from it in his Muqaddimah or Prolegomena to his history, noting that it circulated widely among the people. Al-Mutadawil bayn al-nas. Not sure whether this is. There were apparently 2 recensions of an unknown Arabic original of the work: a shorter or Western recension in 7 or 8 maqalas or discourses, approximately 40 folios, and a longer or Eastern recension in 10 maqalas, approximately 100 folios, so twice as long. There do not appear to be any manuscript copies dating from earlier than the 13th to the 14th centuries. However, a manuscript of the longer recension that in 2012, so very recently, was donated to the University of Pennsylvania libraries, if genuine, and this is always a big topic in discussing the Sirr al-asrar, would date from the late 12th to early 13th century. And I owe a real debt of thanks to Owen Owen Cornwall, I believe his name is Owen, who brought this to my attention. So it was dedicated, or at least the dedication is to one of the Zangid rulers. So we have a very early, this could be, there is an earlier manuscript which dates from the middle of the 10th century in the British Library, but it is only a fragment and it has been deemed to be a forgery. A critical edition of the longer version in 10 maqalas was published in 1954. The shorter version remains unpublished. The Baysunghur manuscript is unfortunately a copy of the shorter version in 8 maqalas, so approximately 36 folios. Since I did not have access to any Arabic copies, manuscript copies of the shorter version, I compared it with the longer version. I'll get to this in a moment, which has nevertheless yielded some interesting insights. Getje and Dieber made their own comparison, also not with an Arabic manuscript of the shorter version, but rather with the addition of an anonymous medieval Hebrew translation of the Arabic shorter version. While Getje and Dieber believe that the shorter version is an independent recension, my own view is that it is simply an abridged and in some respects better organized version of the longer version, which is often quite rambling. Moreover, although the Baysunghur manuscript represents the shorter version in 8 maqalas, it in fact consists of material from the 10 maqalas, even though they are not numbered as such. Unlike the longer version, the introduction to Baysunghur's Sirr al-asrar does not contain the rationale for Aristotle's correspondence with Alexander. Nor does it mention the legend about how the work was discovered and came to be translated. Rather, after praise of God and the prophet, it states that God created man and jinn so they might worship him, said in Quran 51:56. And he created kings to guide men, provide them with sustenance and maintain harmony. Of all the kings in history, it singles out Alexander, Dhul Qarnayn, as the greatest and most just, and attributes his success and the prosperity of his realm to Aristotle, the chief of scholars, Rais al-Ulama, whom some regarded, it states, as a prophet, albeit not one sent by God. Nabiyun ghayr mursal. This is a clear departure from the longer version in which Alexander is not portrayed in a particularly positive light. In fact, the correspondence was initiated by his writing to Aristotle to ask him whether he should kill off all the Persian nobles now that he had conquered Iran. What follows after the introduction in the Baysunghur manuscript is from Maqala 1 on the different types of kings. Although the title, and this Maqala starts here, and the introduction ends here, although the title and the first part of the Maqala are missing, it appears that there are at least 2 folios missing between folios 2b and 3a. The manuscript was originally not foliated. So the current foliation, you can see here is very, very tiny, 3, conceals the lacuna. Curiously, unlike the rest of the manuscript, which provides catchwords at the end of each folio, there is no catchword at the bottom of folio 2b, which is only 11 lines long rather than the 12 found in the rest of the manuscript. This leads me to suspect, here you have a catchword, okay? So every folio has its rakabe, as it's called in Persian, and you can see it leads here. But we don't have, this rakabe here at all. It doesn't even appear to have been obliterated, as sometimes is the case. I have had this experience examining manuscripts where the rakabe has, for a particular reason, been eradicated. This leads me to suspect that the original folio 3, which would have been here, must have contained an illustration, perhaps of Aristotle and or Alexander, or of Baysunghur himself in the guise of Alexander. The first folios, and that would be following directly from here, the first folios of the Latin manuscripts, as well as of the vernacular translations, often contained an illustration of Aristotle and or Alexander. You've already seen one from the English translation. This is not to suggest that Baysunghur would have followed this or his atelier would have seen a Latin manuscript. But at any rate, it's curious that we do have these illustrations very regularly in the Latin manuscripts. Readily identified by his signature mustache, seems he always has his little mustache depicted with it, Baysunghur was portrayed often holding or being handed a cup of wine in several of the manuscripts he commissioned. For example, in the copy he commissioned of the Shahnameh in the Gulistan Palace Library, he's portrayed not only as the mythical Pishdadian king and great Iranian culture hero Jamshid, as in our beautiful poster that was picked by Shiva, but also as the Kayanian king Luhrasp. In the copy he commissioned of the Chahar Maqaleh, he is portrayed as the Samanid ruler Nasr bin Ahmad, great patron of poets. And in the copy on the right here of the Persian translation of Khalil wa Dimna, it appears that he is depicted as the late Ghaznavid ruler Bahram Shah, another outstanding patron. Given the way in which Alexander is described in the introduction to the work, I don't think this would have been a stretch. And I'd like to put out an all points bulletin to all libraries and art historians to try to find this illustration, because I am convinced that there was an illustration of Baysunghur, perhaps with Aristotle, and where Baysunghur is depicted as Alexander the Great. Here we have a little later depiction of Alexander in the Seven Sages. This is from the Khamseh of Nizami, and this is Sultan Hussein Baykara here, who was depicted as Alexander. And Aristotle here is to his right. So we have a description of all of the sages. So as I say, I think there is an illustration out there that was removed. The book was rebound, the manuscript was rebound, but it must be somewhere. Maqala 2, now this is a list of the contents of the longer recension, and I'm going to bore you now. I hope I have enough time, I think I do, to give you an idea of the contents of both the longer and the shorter Baysunghur manuscript. Maqala 2 is on the qualities of the king and how he should comport himself. It contains such advice as, quote, let the people's fear of you and their souls be more penetrating than your sword in their guts. This is very Machiavellian kind of advice. It is a mirror for princes. This maqala also contains an apology for astrology, so we have this here, and recommends that the king take it into account in all his daily activities. It's considerably shorter than the corresponding maqala in the longer recension, as some sections were relocated, some of these sections here, for example, physiognomy, to maqala 7, and some were omitted entirely. Maqala 3, which was mistitled Maqala 8, which I think is scandalous. I don't know whether this occurs in other Baysunghuri manuscripts that were copied by Jafar al-Baysunghuri, but at any rate, it is mistitled as Maqala 8, is on justice. Here we encounter the maxim, and I apologize if I'm sort of a little bit, yes, here we encounter the maxim, kingship and justice are two brothers. each of whom cannot do without the other. A variant of the better known version, kingship and religion are twin brothers. This is both from the Ardashir. The illustration of the circle of justice, which Aristotle describes as a figure of his own invention, has always been the main draw of the manuscript, rather than significance of its contents. So here we have this, it's hidden in the manuscript. So perhaps those people who removed the illustration of Baysunghur qua Aristotle missed it. But little did I know when I titled my book Le Monde est un jardin, which was based on the Aristotelian lectures I gave in Paris back in 2001, when I titled it after the first formula in the maxim of the circle of justice. This is a digital rendering that I had done of this circle. Little did I know that this was actually the Sirr al-asrar. So I feel really stupid afterwards. But in my defense, I was basing myself on Tom Lentz and Glenn Lowry's authoritative catalog, Timur and the Princely Vision, dating from 1985, which contains a reproduction from the manuscript at the head of their introduction to the catalog. The dissertation of our conference convener, Shiva Mihan, has done much to rectify this confusing state of affairs in Timurid art history, and I'm very grateful to her for some of her suggestions. Maqala 4 on viziers. Oh, and here we have the circle of the maxim of justice, which of course I could give a separate lecture on, but won't. And so here we are, chapter 4 on viziers, lacks the number and the title is not written in gold letters. So I find this a little bit sloppy. So I don't know, perhaps Simon Rettig can give us some background on Jafar of Baysunghuri's copying of Arabic, whether he was always very accurate when he was doing that kind of work. In this maqala, Aristotle says that he will be revealing certain divine secrets, asrar ilahiyya. The sections on the universal soul, the human senses, and the influence of the stars on character have been omitted. The focus is on viziers and the 15 characteristics of the ideal minister. One of these is that the vizier must be a fine chancery scribe and a cultured calligrapher, which, although not added by Baysunghur himself, because it's in the longer version, would certainly have reflected his interests. This maqala includes 2 short chapters, babs, one on chancery correspondence, presumably relating to the duties of the vizier, which is actually maqala 5 in the longer version, and the other on the officials responsible for the taxation of subjects, which is actually maqala 7 in the longer version. Maqala 4 opens with the statement that the ruler's subjects are his Beit al-Mal, his treasury. Maqala 5, called Al-Bab al-Khamisa, seek on ambassadors, is actually maqala 6 in the longer version. According to this discourse, the Persians, al-Furs, used to make a foreign envoy drink wine so that he might disclose the secrets of his kingdom. And they would also bribe him, offer him money, which if he accepted it, convinced them that his kingdom would soon fall into their hands. Maqala 6 on the regulation of the army, its commanders and cavalry is maqala 8 in the longer version. It states that armies are the quintessence of the kingdom, zubdat al-mamlaka, and the glory of the state. It counsels that there should be 4 commanders in chief because there are 4 cardinal points. This is very Sasanian, by the way. What follows is a description of the decimal system of military organization and the duties of the military scribe. The section about the so-called Horn of Themistius has been omitted. Maqala 7 on the conduct of war is Maqala 9 in the longer version, where the longer version recommends using soldiers from various nationalities in order to pit them against each other. This recommendation, by the way, is also found in the Qabusnameh and the Sirr al-Muluk of Nizam al-Mulk. The Baysunghur manuscript only mentions Indians, treacherous and not brave, and Turks, brave but stupid. I'm sorry, that's what it says. The discourse omits the discussion about elective astrology, ikhtiyarat and nujum. However, it does include a detailed description of the onomantic technique for determining the victor and the vanquished in a battle, better known as al-ghalib wal-maghlub. In the Baysunghur manuscript, it is called Hisab Ashab al-Harb. Aristotle states that this is one of the divine secrets, again, al-asrar al-ilahiyya, vouchsafed him by God. It involves calculating the numerical values of the names of the two opposing commanders, dividing them by nines until a remainder is produced, and consulting a table for the winner and the loser. The various possible results are listed as separate babs in the Baysunghur manuscript. Maqala 7 also contains a separate chapter on physiognomy, firasa, which in the longer version comes from Maqala 2. This pseudoscience was deemed essential for a ruler, allowing him to read a person's character on the basis of their physical features, eyes, hairs, nose, etc. In the classifications of the sciences, it was traditionally regarded as one of the natural sciences, al-ulum al-tabi'iyya, and grouped together with medicine, astrology, oneiromancy, talismans, theurgy, alchemy, and agriculture, as well as the special properties of things, including precious and semi-precious stones. In Baysunghur's manuscript, however, it is called a conjectural science, min al-ulum al-fikriya. I've never really encountered this, so it's interesting that it kind of is a little more tentative, I would say. It doesn't hold the same sort of surety that some of the other descriptions of firasa contain. This section is like a moving target, difficult to compare to the long version. The famous anecdote about Polymon, the late antique Greek author known as the master of physiognomy, Sahib al-Firasa, and Hippocrates has been omitted. Highlights, though, include avoiding people with blue eyes, deemed untrustworthy, soft hair, a sign of timidity, and those with any kind of physical defect or deformity. The bab on physiognomy is followed by a chapter on health. And again, this is also found in chapter 2 here, health and hygiene in the longer version. Again, in this bab, Aristotle purports to reveal to Alexander some of the secrets of medicine, Sirr al-asrar at-tib. So you get the idea, there's all this kind of secret, revelation of special kinds of knowledge. And these secrets will free Alexander from dependence on physicians. Aristotle makes recommendations concerning exercise, grooming, diet, sleep, and sex, taking into account seasonal changes that are synced with the Galenic system of the four humors. Omitted are the discussions about the parts of the body, diet, wine, the merits of the bath, and the recipes for a panacea. Maqala 8, getting there, bear with me, is much shorter than the corresponding Maqala 10 in the longer version, which deals at length with various occult sciences, including the talismanic arts, astrology, alchemy, with a reference to the philosopher's egg and a citation from the emerald tablet of Hermes, and it differs substantially from it. The Baysunghur manuscript Maqala is entitled Fi Ulum Khasa wa Dhikr Khawas al-Ahjar, special sciences or some special sciences and the properties of stones. The maqala is introduced by a statement about the essential, unchanging nature of the universe, with the implication that change can nevertheless be effected. Aristotle states that his real objective is to share with Alexander something of the riddle of the greatest secret, min rams Sirr al-asrar. This is followed by succinct discussions about the production of gold and silver, which Aristotle calls the highest science, ilm al-ulum, how to fashion a talismanic seal ring, powerful poisons that can be used for averting war, and the properties of precious and semi-precious stones and other organic and inorganic substances, such as the bezoar. I don't know how to pronounce this, bezoar stone. This is the pazar or pazar in Persian, a well-known antidote against poisons. There is also a description of the ruby, yakut, useful against the plague, the emerald, zumurrud, which can honor anyone who wears it, an Ethiopian stone called al-habat, ? And turquoise, firuzaj, which is highly praised by kings because a person who wears it cannot be killed, and when dissolved in water, it acts as an antidote against snake and scorpion bites. After all this talk about occult knowledge, however, Aristotle does an about-face, stating that alchemy is not a true science. Al-kimya ilm la haqiqata lahu, which I find very odd. And he counsels Alexander to focus instead on agricultural activity, because this will be the foundation of the prosperity of his realm. Here we have the descriptions, the Hajar al-Zumurrud, and Hilda Firuzaj, and so on. This seemingly insignificant little book, and I'm giving you the dimensions here. It's not even 8 inches high by 4 inches wide. So I'm obsessed with the sizes of manuscripts, which I think we should really spend more time on, pay more attention to. This is the size of it. This is the size of a folio, right? So it's very small, very handy, perhaps intended for like personal use, not so much. And I think this may be one of the reasons why there are so few manuscripts of the Sirr al-asrar that are in existence. I think they were used personally, and perhaps because they had all this secret occult knowledge, were hidden from general view. This seemingly insignificant little manuscript confirms several key values, I would say, in Islamicate political thought. The first is the reassertion of the notion of divine election. Since God has chosen the king to rule over the people, he is like a god. This is what it states in the introduction. I'm not saying this myself. He is like a god, and he should resemble God in his divine attributes, notably justice. Justice is one of the divine names. Al-Adl is one of the divine names. The second is the incontrovertible authority of ancient wisdom. And there was no greater authority in the Islamicate world, of course, alongside Quranic revelation, than Aristotle. The third is that kings and princes throughout Islamicate history were hungry for esoteric, if not occult knowledge, that they believed could assist them in controlling their own lives, their armies, their subjects, and even cosmic forces. This was the promise of the secrets Aristotle reveals to Alexander, who serves as a proxy for the royal reader of the day, in this case, Baysunghur himself. Little wonder that, as in the case of the Latin Secretum Secretorum and its vernacular translations, the Arabic Sirr al-asrar was to be found first and foremost in the royal libraries of Muslim kings and princes. Baysunghur was just one such example. I've also already indicated, you've seen the image of the Zangid manuscript. According to the inventory made in 909, that's 1503, 1504, of the Ottoman Palace Library of Baysunghur's near contemporary Mehmet II and his son Bayezid II, it contained 6 copies of the Sirr al-asrar, including a Persian translation. The work was translated into Ottoman Turkish several times, starting in the 16th century and thereafter. The reference to a Persian translation is intriguing. I have not been able to find that manuscript because the inventory doesn't tell us, and I'm very grateful to Guluru Necipoglu and her team for publishing the inventory of that library. However, it's very difficult to be able to locate the manuscripts that are listed in that inventory, and I really would like to find the Persian translation, which is listed there. It's interesting that Baysunghur's manuscript retained the original Arabic and was not translated into Persian or Chagatai Turkish, for that matter. Perhaps he regarded the Arabic as having some special power and prestige. The earliest translation of the work into Persian was possibly, I say possibly, done by Jalaluddin Davani, who included excerpts from it under the heading Darvasayaya Aristotelis, that is on the Testament of Aristotle, at the end of his work, the Akhlaq-i-Jalali, which he composed in 879, so 1474, and which he dedicated to the Akuyunlu ruler Uzun Hasan and his son, again, without questioning the veracity of his authorship. So again, we have an example of the Sirr al-asrar, at least the translation of excerpts from it, done for a royal patron. Under the Safavids, there was a resurgence of interest. I'm only saying resurgence because I haven't been able to trace things earlier. And here we have the intervention and the active participation in the transmission of this text, translation of it, by Shiite clerics. So Muhammad Baqir Sabzavari, a leading Shiite scholar and the Shaykh al-Islam of Isfahan, included Davani's translated passages without attribution to Davani under the same heading, Darvasayaya Aristotelis, in his Rozat al-Anvar Abbasi, a treatise on government dedicated to Shah Abbas II. Muhammad Hussein Borujerdi, another religious scholar who taught in the Royal Mosque of Isfahan, also did a translation of it for Shah Abbas II. In the late 19th century, an anonymous author compiler, possibly Ali Akbar Husseini Shirazi, completed a translation, we know exactly when and where, in Bushehr in 1295-96, so 1878-79, where he had been sent by the Qajar ruler Nasiruddin Shah, in which he criticized the translation of Borujerdi, who he says repeated the mistakes made by none other than Davani. And he provided not only the Arabic texts and translations of the offending passages, but also his own literal Persian translation. So there's a lot of research. I'm just skimming the surface. I was looking for Persian translations and I came across these references. I did get manuscripts of some of these translations, but there is really, there's a lot to be done here. So the Sirr al-asrar, oh, I thought I would just end with this, but I will say something about it. I just want to give you my conclusion. So the Sirr al-asrar is a gold mine, but it's also a quagmire. It influenced most mirrors for princes, particularly in the Perso-Islamic tradition. This is a contention I am making that needs to be supported by much more research. I just see so many echoes, and I have worked and taught courses on Persian mirrors for princes, and came to the Sirr al-asrar quite late in my career and in my research interests. But it seems to me that there is just so much influence. There are just echoes and quotations from the Sirr al-asrar in many of the subsequent mirrors for princes written in Persian. So I think it influenced many Persian mirrors for princes, but sorting out the many versions of the Sirr al-asrar in scores of undated and often unidentified manuscripts, not to mention possible fakes. I think this is a real possibility in the case of this particular work, scattered throughout the world, is a daunting task. And I think it requires another lifetime and a scholar more junior than myself. I thought I would end with this intriguing image of the, this is actually not related to the Sirr al-asrar. It's from the Kitab al-Bulhan, but I couldn't, when I came across it, I couldn't help but, thinking that it could be a kind of an illustration of the Talisman al-Mulk, the talisman of kingship, which is not in the Baysunghur manuscript. There are many sort of more occult aspects that are not included in the shorter version, but are in the longer version. So the description of how to fashion the talisman of sovereignty, or the imperial talisman, or the talisman of kingship, is only in the longer version and not in all versions. And it's interesting that in the edition that was done of the Latin translation of the Secretum Secretorum by Francis Bacon, 13th century, this was omitted. In fact, many aspects of this last 10th chapter from the longer version, which includes so much about the occult sciences, were omitted. But I thought I would just give you this translation so that it would give you a flavor of what the longer version is like and what was omitted by Baysunghur. So let's see if we can follow the recipe for this talisman. Assemble the substance of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon in the highest of them, that is Saturn predominating. Okay, I'm stuck there already. What is the Jauhar of Saturn? Add a quantity of gold equal to the amount between the Sun and the ascendant of Leo. At the time of the operation, the Sun should be in the 13th degree from Aries in strength, ascendancy, and overlooking it. Blah, blah, blah. When all the conditions have been met, assemble all the substances by melting them on the morning of Thursday at the hour of Jupiter. Then fashion out of it a seal ring, inset with the square red ruby, and engrave on it the image of a man riding a lion. So that's why when I saw this image, it really, here's the man kind of riding a lion. You have this, these very occult symbols here, and it's the description of the Malik al-Ahmar wa talismuhu, and his talisman. So following many suffumigations and invocations to each of the planets on their night, culminating in the greatest invocation to the sun. So this is from the edition, the 1954 edition of the Sirr al-asrar by Badawi. I think the notion of secrets, of secrecy, of occult, if not esoteric, just esoteric knowledge, is something that was very much in demand. And I am not surprised that this book was in Baysunghur's library and that he had it copied. I am surprised that we have no other Timurid copies of it. But if any of my colleagues know of such a manuscript, I would be very grateful for that information, and then might be able to continue to do some more work on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, that opened up a fascinating whole subject area for you or other persons to get on with. Very interesting.